Today, I'm joined by two dear friends, Joe Pope and Austin McNair from Hinge, a marketing and branding agency for professional services firms. Joe is a partner at the agency, and Austin is a senior marketing manager. Both of them interface with clients, and they have responsibilities of marketing the agency. So I think their perspective is very valuable, especially for professional services firms. I wanted to chat with Joe and Austin because they bring unique perspective on marketing, sales, and business development, driven by their annual high growth study, which looks at 1,000 different professional services firms of various growth rates and industries. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for giving us the platform to, one, get together again, John. You know, it was always great to work with you in the past, and also the opportunity for us to shill our high growth study, which we've recently wrapped up. Austin could wax poetic about the amount of time that we made him spend on it, but it's been an exciting process to get that research finally released. At this point, Austin, how many have we done now at this point? That's 10 at this point now?
No, man, you got to say 10 for next year. This is our 9th annual high growth study done consecutively year over year. And John, we got to give you some credit as well.
Yeah.
As this thing was kicking off back early in those days, you had a heavy hand in getting this set up and kind of building the foundation for it. So as Joe said, it's great to spend some time with you and update you on how it's progressed since maybe you last interfaced with it, and excited to share some details with your audience.
I totally understand how much time you've spent on the study. So, yeah, I totally feel you there. No, it's a great study. I love the intent behind it. And I think that there is no other place where you can get as much research on professional services firms as Hinge and the Hinge Research Institute. So kudos to you guys for continuing publishing all that valuable information. I know there's a bunch of professional services marketers, business developers that get a ton of value out of that study every single year. Speaking of business development, Joe, you co-authored an article on the Hinge blog, and I want to dig into this because I co-host a podcast with Mark Wainwright called Breaking Biz Dev, where we break down, beat up, and redefine business development for professional services firms. And the article that you wrote, called A Game-Changing Business Development Strategy to Achieve Consistent Growth. If folks that are listening to this, go to the Hinge blog and check this out. In that article, you define business development as the process that is used to identify, nurture, and acquire new clients and business opportunities to drive growth and profitability. So let's unpack this a little bit. Let's break that down. Can you expand upon that definition? So what do we mean by business opportunities to drive growth? I mean, that can mean a bunch of different things to a bunch of different firms.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I remember when I saw you and Mark launched the Breaking Biz Dev podcast and had put some of your high-level thoughts into a few LinkedIn posts, including definitions and reasoning for where these different sections come to play: marketing, sales, capture, you name it. I debated drafting out my 15 to 20 paragraph response. And I think I ended up just going with the typical 3-sentence, can't wait to listen to the podcast and catch up. And it has been, you and Mark have done a great job of this. It's been a really good way for, especially in professional services, which has its own nitty gritty details that business development really means, and having a forum to talk about it. Because one thing where we really wanted to go and talk about it from the Hinge perspective, being a group that spends so much time in research and looking across the various ways that organizations go about bringing in new money, there gets to be quite a dissecting view of how that actually is done or handled. The government contractors, for example, you'll find them all the time talk about marketing, and it's not marketing, right? Not in the sense that it's not really being focused to great visibility. It's writing proposals that they found, opportunities that they found on websites or for municipalities, state government, so on and so forth. But on the flip side, you talk about one man, one woman armies and business development, and they truly could never check off all the boxes that it would require to do exactly as we wrote that definition out to be, which is go through all of the steps it takes to bring in new revenue. And that's that's the big reason why I thought from the professional services space, it was worth sitting down and pumping out, I think, 5,000 words about exactly why the reasons of business development can encompass a lot and which those different stages are. So we can talk those through. I don't want to hijack your show.
No. This is totally fine. No, what I'd love to do, Joe, is so you mentioned that there are a number of different players
That's right.
involved in developing new business, both internally within firms, but then also externally. Before we were hopping on, you mentioned teaming partners as one. I think it's a great example. Like, what are some of the other roles involved, both internally and externally, to developing business?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, one of the biggest things now, especially in this modern digital way where professional services are going through the process of developing business, is that the one-man army that we were talking about, that lone wolf who'd go out and find the work, bring it in, use their Rolodex.
Rainmakers, right?
The rainmaker, right?
Yeah.
That methodology, while still existing, that role, while still does exist, is really only one player in a larger spectrum. So when Hinge looks at business development and what this article breaks down, and also we wrote an executive guide on this too. So I referenced 5,000 words for a blog. I think it's 50,000 words in that guide. And we'd be happy if you were interested in putting a link up or things along those lines. It's one of our most popular pieces of content. Is that these different roles are places like the management of digital SEO strategy, or the creation of thought-provoking and interesting content. It's also things like leaders of proposal development teams, or the investigation of various opportunities that could exist by tools, softwares, you name it. We've got Zoom Infos, we've got LinkedIn Navigator, we've got all sorts of different platforms that are available. And it's all of these different roles and which ones are going to be most effective for your business. That's really the big question, because there's a lot of different things you can do. And we, as a marketing agency that's very focused in strategy development, we find it's very common for organizations to just try to check boxes, but it may not necessarily be the right boxes. And that's a big reason why, we were happy that you were able to mention it at the top of the intro, was that this research that we're doing, the high growth study research, is designed to help answer those questions and allow folks a better pathway to making the right decisions across these various different roles.
Yep. And I think you do a good, I'm imagining just the tip of an iceberg, right? And that's your rainmaker, that's your main doer seller that's out there, the face of the organization. They're supported by these tools, these teams.
That's right.
I can see how business development can be misconstrued on the outside looking in, because there is so much that goes into supporting those processes, both the marketing and the sales components, and how those two are kind of married together and connected. In your opinion, based on the firms you've talked to, because Joe, you talked to hundreds of firms,
give or take. Yeah.
And based on the firms you've talked to, and then just the behavior you've observed, what do you think is broken about what we know as business development in professional services?
Yeah. And I love that you all just dedicate a show, a piece of content you all are creating on this topic, because it is so broken. The thought process here is a lot of professional services organizations have been grown on the backs of that rainmaker model. You have individuals who are very focused on building relationships. They're creating that, quote, everybody heard it before, trusted advisor position, which allows you to develop personal relationships and a asset of, hey, trust. This is me. You got to work with me, so on and so forth. The major challenge to that is that hasn't stopped competition from growing. That hasn't stopped folks from embracing digital thoroughly in how they make decisions and how they run their day-to-day lives, both personally and professionally. And you're only one person, right? And although you can set up a LinkedIn platform or you can have a social media, you can go to conferences, you can have support staff that helps you with your emails and messages, you're never going to be able to develop a ecosystem of visibility with that rainmaker model. Unfortunately, the people who are typically in executive and budgetary decision-making seats, a lot of times they were born from that. Like they were the rainmakers. They've been successful in growing their businesses. They've developed relationships, and now they sit in a seat that they very well earned and deserved. And they look down at this new ecosystem of how people are making decisions. And they're thinking to themselves, well, why can't Junior or Matt or Jen, why can't they figure out what I did? And let's just grow that way. And it's because the rule book changed.
Yeah.
And across the board, what's broken is that disconnect in embracing what are just factual, because the research points this out and has pointed this out, the shift over the past 10 plus years, or 9, I guess we're getting to 10 next year in terms of Hinge's high growth study. But the research just points out that organizations that are embracing these changes, thinking about things from a team model, the idea of ecosystem of visibility, they're growing their organizations faster. They are the high growth organization.
Okay, so let me unpack that and kind of like present that back to you and see if I understand. So what you're suggesting is it's more of a cultural thing that's broken, or it's the environment has changed so rapidly that these folks that have grown up through maybe more traditional means of developing business, they're in a leadership position, and the road to getting there, while that happened, things have changed so dramatically that
yes,
they can't train the next generation of business developers because the rules are different, because the game has changed.
I think so.
Let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about what's changed and maybe what that landscape looks like. Every year, we mentioned earlier, Hinge does this comprehensive research study. I guess maybe Austin, you could speak to this a little bit. Like, what are some of the characteristics of high growth firms as they relate to this new way of developing business?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot. there's a lot of places we can start. But I mean, the one thing I could say, kind of building off of what Joe was talking about, there is an integration, as you're talking about, between business development and marketing teams, right? Working closer, and marketing has had to get more mature and sophisticated with the strategy that aligns with what folks on the business development side of the table are doing. People that are in sales calls, people that are talking with customers or prospects, they're learning a lot in those calls. They're learning a lot during those sessions. Mm-hmm. And there's got to be some kind of system, internal communication system, where those learned lessons are getting applied on the marketing end. I'll give you one here that seems pretty clear from the research. When we have been asking everyone who takes our high growth study, what is the most impactful marketing technique that you apply? And this year, which I think is probably, this has grown in a proportion larger than what we've seen in years past, the number one most impactful marketing technique was providing assessments and consultations as a part of the marketing program. In other words, providing some sort of call to action beyond the basic contact us, right? Which on every professional services website right now, I bet if you went to 10 different professional services websites, about 7 or 8 of them, the call to action would be something along the lines of, hey, contact us, talk to us, let's start a conversation, right? Something more basic, something more generic. And there's what we're seeing with the high growth firms and some of these overachievers is that they're going beyond just the simple reach out to us, contact us, and they're integrating something within their marketing and business development program, which is a more specific offer. It could be something like an assessment, right? Let us do a holistic assessment of X program, something very specific and tied into whatever the user might be seeing on a particular page. Or let us do a consultation about this top business challenge, right? something that the business development people know is acutely a big issue, when they're talking to prospects. Those messages get passed to marketing. Marketing says, well, how can we start driving interest in this? How can we start sparking more conversations? And by quite a large margin on the impact front, that providing assessments and consultations, that more interesting or more integrated, relevant consultation or assessment strategy, that is the most impactful marketing technique at work right now. In terms of impact, it was rated as 6.6. The next one down was at 6.3, a small margin kind of in terms of numbers. But when you look at kind of all of the data aggregated together, it's actually quite a big margin. And what's more interesting is that when we talk about the other two right behind it in terms of impact, live product and service demonstrations, so something really kind of the same, right, as a consultation offer or an assessment, and then the business development materials and getting those to be as relevant, tailored as possible. So to what Joe was saying earlier, could one individual provide all of this all on their own? In some small organizations, perhaps. But as companies grow up and scale up and they get, into that small business, mid-sized business to large category, you need more on the marketing end to facilitate and drive those kinds of leads that are relevant, high quality, and actually getting out there and being seen by more and more prospects.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is like an accounting firm who has a call to action, contact us, versus accounting firm B who has a call to action, let's see how you can implement AI in your bookkeeping. Those are two completely different ones. That the second offer is much more targeted and relevant.
It's issue-based.
Yeah, it's issue-based. Yeah, exactly. And it's very, very specific. And I think that's kind of at the heart of what you're trying to get at, Austin, is, assessments and consultations. That to me is emblematic of a very, very tough marketplace right now, where there's not a lot of people buying right now. And so people really, if they're going to put their dollars out there, they're going to want something very specific in return, or they're going to need to mitigate their risk in some way. And working with specialists, I think. Yeah.
What you just said is what I think it is entirely, John. And it's trust, right? We know in the professional services space, people want to make buying decisions based on trust, based on their working with that expert. They know my specific challenge. There's always that joke that you hear it going around. Nobody gets fired for hiring Deloitte, right? Because Deloitte is a name of trust.
Right.
So, whatever, let's just go hire Deloitte. But the thought process here, though, is, obviously there's a lot more businesses in the world than Deloitte, and Deloitte is a big monolith. You're never really going to get that individualized, focused type service or connection point that small and mid-sized businesses have thrived on for as long as professional services has existed. So what we as marketers, as sales, as business development need to be able to accomplish, like what Austin described, is to channel folks through the ways that they want to make those buying decisions. And something like a offer that is directly focused on a need or an issue is the perfect way to a lot of times take those first steps into, I trust this guy. Mm-hmm. He really understands my problems, or she spoke so clearly about how this is solved on a day-to-day basis, and so on and so forth. So it's not surprising in the environment we're in right now that folks are seeking out trust and pathways, whether digital or traditional, to make that next step in their journey.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to dig into this a little bit more. So there's a couple of other findings I think that are that help this conversation kind of build a little bit. And, we talked, I mentioned AI as just kind of an example. And the survey pointed out that AI was the number one topic that firms wanted to learn more about. And of course, everyone wants to learn more about AI. It's the new hot, flashy thing. But my interests lie beyond AI. In the results of the report, the next topic or trend that firms wanted to learn more about was how they can deepen those relationships and build trust with their prospective clients. Exactly what you were talking about, Joe. I guess Austin and Joe, like, what are some different ways that firms can achieve that today?
I like the contrast of the two things coming one after the another. I'm sure you've already had enough guests talk about all the efficiencies and tools and kind of the, the hot spot we're living in right now, which may or may not fade a little bit. I mean, it's just tools are going to become, in my opinion, more invisible. AI is going to be something that's kind of working around in the background. And I think why we've seen that explode in terms of interest is because I think there's a lot of anxiety, right? People have a lot of anxiety about like, what are these tools? I don't want to miss the boat. Presumably there's going to be a small cohort of companies that get really far ahead in this, and that's going to lead to some pretty massive advantages. It is interesting. The contrast there is that right underneath that AI answer is, well, we want to deepen relationships. The most human response that we probably have in our survey, which is, how can we really take, the not just the solutions that we provide, but, the relationships for even people that we can't, our referral network. How can we take those to a next level? And it is interesting to me that I think there is kind of this response that we're seeing right now, whereas things have gotten so digital and so impersonal, especially after the pandemic. I think there is kind of a hunger and a craving again, especially among younger folks and kind of the millennial generation that is now kind of taking into the managerial class. And relationships are not going anywhere. I mean, at the end of the day, we'll see this from another piece of research that we do called Inside the Buyer's Brain. Personal relationships are still at the top of the list there in terms of decision criteria, in terms of how people would select or find a vendor, like the referral network I mentioned. So deepening relationships, getting more training, those soft skills with your staff, with your marketing, with your business development team, they are super essential today. And as much as AI might solve a lot of our workflow problems, I don't think it necessarily solves all of our problems in terms of how do we grow as people, and how do we grow as being able to build relationships within our professional network.
I think the one thing that really stood out to me, on top of what you just walked through, Austin, was that this was an online focus to building relationships. It was spelled out as digitally focused. And it was very apparent to high growth firms that this was number 2 on that list underneath the buzzword AI. So what that really points to me is that higher growth organizations, we go back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, John, that broken part of business development, organizations that are growing faster than their peers understand that they can't get by just by traditional effort to grow and deepen client and prospect engagements. It is a necessity that you can do these things through digital means. And ones making more money than not are understanding that and focused on it.
I recently had a conversation with Randy Crabtree, who was the managing partner of Tri-Merit, and now he hosts the Unique CPA podcast. And one of the things that he pointed out was the podcast that he runs was a way for him to develop relationships with prospective clients, because Tri-Merit offers specialty R&D tax credit services to other CPA firms, but that's not the focus of the podcast. He said that he wants to talk about anything but R&D tax credit, right? And that's by design, and that reinforces the position, because what he's trying to do is he's trying to elevate the other CPAs that are working, that are his client partners. So I just thought that was an interesting example of maybe a digital channel or medium that can be used to kind of accelerate building trust and relationships. The study also found that building trust and relationships, that's very important. But the study also found that firms are also experiencing a squeeze from both larger firms, but then also, the barriers of entry today in terms of new businesses popping up they're popping up all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And so firms are feeling a squeeze from the bottom as well in terms of new competitors. I guess maybe what does it take for firms to differentiate in today's marketplace?
Research. Yeah, research is the answer to that, because what ends up happening if you don't attribute your message, your positioning, your brand, your identity, you name it, if you don't attribute it to the types of target audiences, customers, recruits, teaming partners that you want more of, the likelihood of you being able to create something that is truly unique to what they care about without their voices being involved is minimal. How many of the top 300 accounting and financial services firms slap "will be your trusted advisor" on their homepage? But we've asked that type of question to buyers of accounting services for multiple decades now. And where we want to buy a trusted advisor, that doesn't show up on their list. I mean,
like, trust is the outcome, right?
Trust is the outcome.
You can't just say we're going to be your trusted advisor.
That's right. You have to prove that. And that's
Right.
part of the reason why you're seeing the high growth firms that are leveraging techniques that channel folks to trusting you faster, why they're being more successful, why those are the techniques which are being embraced as a part of larger business development strategies. I mean, the data doesn't lie. And that's a big reason why, you want to be focused. You want to be narrow. I mean, all the typical marketing things. You want to be narrow. You want to be focused, but you need to be using words that really do resonate with the folks that you want to have conversations with, first and foremost.
It sounds like, and I've always, I don't know, maybe like 5 years ago or something, it just finally like clicked for me that research is just kind of like a pathway to being able to empathize with your audience at scale. And so empathy is really like kind of like one of the building blocks of trust, right? And so if you can do your research, you're able to empathize and understand the pain points that your audience is going through. And so to your point, you're able to create more relevant messages. You're able to kind of understand when the right times to reach out in their seasonality are, right? You wouldn't want to bother an accountant during the busy season, wait till after April 15th, maybe, right? But
doesn't it go to May now, though? I mean,
time is just a flat circle, and it's just all crazy right now. But Austin, do you have anything to add to this whole differentiation conversation? I think Joe brings up a really great point about research, but what other ways can firms differentiate today?
Building off of what Joe said, so the research foundation, I love the way how did you say that, John? You just said it's a pathway towards understanding empathy with your buyers?
Something like that.
I think it needs to go in a coffee mug.
Oh, wow.
Just put it on my mug.
Let's pull the transcript and find out.
What a quote. So once you have that research, though, there is the matter of actually activating it, right? And saying, well, what are we going to do with these findings? We can empathize with our customers. We understand maybe what their most acute pain points are. We understand kind of our perception, our positioning in the marketplace, what's coming through, what's not coming through. There is an activation feature of this that, matters quite a bit. I'll give you an example. I was just reviewing a website for a technology company, and they led with language that said, we are this award-winning IT design studio. It's like, okay, that's a very impressive headline to see when you come onto the homepage. So I explored and I looked through the rest of the website. Well, what awards did they win? What does that mean? It sounded kind of exciting. Nowhere, anywhere on the website could I find anything about any of the awards they had won. Not to mention, did this company really do any research to understand, do their customers care about the award-winning thing? Is that really the problem that they're trying to solve, is we want to work with an award-winning studio? Now, look, awards are actually something, interestingly enough, that high-growth firms appear to be increasing their adoption and pursuing as kind of a validation point, a differentiator, and in some cases, like a nice bit of press and news for the company. So don't hear me saying that, these kind of industry awards or how they could be connected to different associations or events, they don't matter. I think that they do matter. But the point is, are you validating the things that you're saying about yourself? We have a great team. Well, can I see who those people are? What makes them so great? Tell me more about these great team members who are so sharp. Have they produced any kind of original content? Are they, can I find them on LinkedIn? Have they spoken at conferences? Give me something that differentiates company, but also give me, some validation that what you're saying actually is real. And it's just amazing, John, how many, engagements that we get into where oftentimes we're reviewing the competitors of a lot of our clients, and we're just seeing this laundry list of mistakes in terms of people not backing up in any kind of meaningful ways the things that they're saying about it themselves. And instead, that's where you get things like trusted advisor, which is just, a great thing to say, but it has no kind of backing to it, right? You said trust is the outcome, right? Show us actual outcomes, show us actual results. And that appears to be what high growth firms do really well, is in terms of differentiating themselves. They're not just saying the right things that are resonating with their audiences. They're actually backing it up and producing interesting, relevant content that validates everything that they're saying about themselves.
Okay. So there's a couple key takeaways for me on what you just said, Austin. Number one is the very first word in that headline. What is it? We, right?
Yeah.
It's all about them. It's not about their buyers. That to me tells, and I'm big on first person to second person ratio in marketing copy. There should be more yous than there should be more second person than first person. So I think that kind of embodies, Joe, what you're talking about in terms of researching your audience. You should be able to understand your audience and then tailor your messages to you and not us. So that was kind of like the first big takeaway. Second one, Austin, was like feature these team members, right? And I think that that's another way that firms can stand out in the marketplace, is to build up the personal brands of the individual subject matter experts, those doer sellers, right? You know, developing new business and professional services is much easier if you have an established and a visible personal brand. And I know that that's a lot of what Hinge does, is looking at the personal brands of what you call visible experts. I wanted to touch on one other stat that I thought was really interesting from the high growth study. Austin, let's start with you. So according to the most recent high growth study, creating content was the number one priority of high growth firms. Almost 37% of firms identified that as one of their major marketing priorities this year. In your opinion, why do you think content creation is at the top of this list? And what are some examples of the kinds of content that firms want to create?
Sure. Yes. Great questions. And I love the framing of it. Why is it at the top of the list? Well, I think it's because it's not only is it not going anywhere, it's gotten a lot harder, John. And I think you know this firsthand. I mean, you're kind of ahead of the curve here on the podcasting front. You're experimenting with some, emerging mediums here in terms of creating content in an efficient way. I think the question is, for a lot of firms, is, well, we were told to do content marketing, right? So we started doing content marketing, and the results have been mixed, right? We've started blogging. What has that really got us? A lot of people are having a really hard time attributing the impact of their content efforts to it. But the solution there certainly isn't to, well, let's just stop making content. It doesn't work. That's a negative mindset. And generally speaking, at least I haven't come across any professional services firms that have found something to replace that with in light of content marketing, right? So what do we do then? Well, the emphasis has to be on making content that's better, that's more interesting, that actually relates to the kinds of things that your buyers and prospects would care about reading, and something that stands out, right? It's too easy to just write generic content now. And I think with the AI tools that are out there now, you can write a 1,000 word article on business development in 10 minutes, right? It'll do that for you. And it will provide some pretty good examples. And if you're really good at prompt engineering, you can make it, a pretty decent article. But what about that is it going to produce that is unique to you or unique to your business? And I think that that's the challenge. Why it's at the top of the list is because it's becoming harder.
Yep.
We've got to really put an emphasis as marketers on how do we become more interesting? What is really our unique perspective on these different topics? Or do we have the same solution as everybody else? And that's a really, I think it's a really sobering thing to think about for a lot of marketers, especially, and it can be stressful too, because the people with the most perspective, the ones that are, really probably on the cutting edge of these unique ideas, they're busy, they're delivering work. They're at the heart of, some of the, most important work that's going on at any company. So capturing that in an efficient way and leading with that kind of content, that's got to be a top priority. That's what you mentioned earlier about the experts and getting the experts involved. It is a super hard challenge, but I think it is the path forward for many marketers who they understand that generic content is no longer just going to be enough. They have to lead with original perspectives that really represent the expertise of the firm. One other way to kind of differentiate that content is by producing original research, as Joe mentioned. So to kind of tie a bow on this, as you know, in terms of the many use cases for doing research as both, you know, a firm and your overall brand strategy, but also locally as your marketing team and producing content, you can, to create something that is unique to you, is to conduct research and to present and talk about those findings. Case in point, the high growth study, right? This is what Hinge has done for years now in sort of differentiating ourselves. You know, it's no secret that marketing agencies are probably one of the most competitive groups of companies out there in the world, right? And we're all competing with each other for attention. And we found out years ago that we weren't just going to do that by spilling out the same kind of marketing advice that everybody else was talking about at the time. We needed to do original research and really bring unique findings to the conversation. That's what makes it interesting. That's what makes people pay attention. And that's, at the end of the day, how high growth firms end up making higher quality content that people pay attention to and that leads to better conversations on the business development. So there's a lot there. And, you know, if people want to learn more about the high growth study that we've mentioned so many times, John, it's easy. Just go to hingemarketing.com/high growth and you'll get the executive summary for free. And a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today is in there.
Excellent. Yes, folks that are listening or maybe they're watching on YouTube, go to hingemarketing.com, check out, they've got a library of research reports, of guides. Joe, I think you mentioned the business development guide.
Yep.
Austin, I think you also mentioned Inside the Buyer's Brain, which is a research study on buyers of professional services. So yeah, go and check out those resources. They're all free, and they're very, very valuable. So yes, Joe, Austin, thank you so much for this conversation. It was awesome to catch up, and I love talking about all of this research that Hinge is putting out.
Well, you left the door open for us, John. We're going to find our way back into the studio again soon. But yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you today.
It's been great, John. Thanks a lot.